Hi, I'm Jo Sparrow, the president of Jigsaw Queensland and host of Adopt Perspective podcast. Today I'm joined by Tracy Graham. Tracy was born in Exeter in the UK in 1964 and adopted 6 months later in 1965. Her life story spans countries and decades and includes long periods of silence about her adoption, significant harm within her adoptive family, and later searches and reunions with both of her biological parents. Tracy's story speaks to the lifelong impact of adoption, not just the moment of placement, and to the complexity of reconnecting later in life when truths emerge slowly and not always evenly. Tracy, thank you so much for being here and for trusting us with your story.
Thank you, Jo. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Tracy, could we start by discussing your experience growing up in your adoptive family? How would you describe the emotional environment of that home?
I think growing up in my adoptive family, the environment was really quite complex. I guess from the outside, things looked quite stable and my practical needs were met, but I think love just wasn't available in my home in what I would describe as a really consistent and emotionally safe way. I think from early on, it was important for me to be compliant, almost like self-contained. There wasn't much space for feelings, especially difficult ones. And adoption was not talked about openly. And I think with that over time, I adapted, not because, it was healthy, not because it was healthy, but it was really necessary. I simply assumed that that's how families worked. And I thought that fitting in meant keeping parts of myself just really quiet. So that's... My adoptive mother was really volatile. That created a really deep sense of uncertainty for me. I never knew quite what version I was going to get on a daily basis. I don't think any of us knew, really, including my adoptive father. Each day was quite unpredictable. And so I really learned to stay alert and to read her mood, quickly listen to any tone in her voice, avoid any conflict. It made me cautious. I really didn't feel safe expressing myself. Saturday mornings was the worst time because it was washing day. Washing day was always the day that she was angry, always angry at washing day. And I don't quite know, but it was just something that I always tried to avoid, Saturday mornings, washing day. And so that was always a day where I never felt safe. And I think living with that volatility it makes you grow up on edge. It leaves you anticipating the next thing to happen. So I was never fully myself in that environment. So, yeah.
Yeah. What was the makeup of your family? There was your adoptive mother. Who else was in the family?
Yeah, there was my adoptive mother, my adoptive father, and they had adopted a boy before they adopted me. And we were very different. He was the blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy, and I was a very healthy lad. And it was always a case, my mother had always said to me, we adopted you so that he would never go out feeling lonely. So you kind of make yourself like, hey, well, that's the reason why I'm here. So yeah, it was a few odd things that people say in that sort of situation. He was very much the favoured person in the family. And I knew that right from the start, or as soon as I started understanding the family dynamics. He never could do anything wrong, and whereas I guess, even though I was quiet, I was, quite rebellious in some ways. I'd always try and escape to my bedroom wherever I could. That was my sort of safe environment. And she was, I guess she made it known to me that he was special. She would use phrases such as, your brother's a king to you and you'll never be anything like him and things like that. So it was very soul destroying. Right from the word go, and of course I resented him in quite a big way because I couldn't find my place in that family at all.
You shared with me that your adoptive mother once said something that was quite distressing for you. Can you tell us what that was?
Yeah, we were getting ready to go out one day, I do remember, and she was upstairs. I can't remember if she was having an argument with my father, but she flew down the stairs, and she was in one of her volatile moments. And I remember where I was just standing in the dining room, and she flew down the stairs and said, I will never love you. I will feed you and clothe you, but that's all. It was very unexpected at the time, because like I said, we were getting ready to go out for the day as a family, and I remember being stunned and shocked. And you know, in a really strange way, kind of almost accepting of this statement. And I recall sitting in the back of the car when we were going out and just anticipating, how am I going to ask her today if what she said was true? And I think I hung on to her arm all day, just trying to pluck up the courage, but I never did.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Well, I just assumed that I was the problem, and then I just assumed that love had to be earned through good behaviour and gratitude and silence. So I promised myself I wouldn't cry during this interview anyway.
Don't be sorry. God, that must have had just an incredible impact on you, ongoing, hearing something like that as a child.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, she did say, you know, I would feed you and clothe you, but that is all. Yeah, and yeah, it's funny. I remember where I was when I was hanging onto her arm, trying to pluck up the courage. So yeah, and that was always part of growing up with them. It's if I had a question that I wanted to ask, it would be ages before I could ask it. You know, I took so long in plucking up courage to ask anything really. I mean, even like, could I watch a specific TV program and things like that? So
Yeah, it sounds like you're always negotiating her mood and trying to figure out, being hyper
yeah,
vigilant around her, what
yeah,
was going to be safe to say and what wouldn't be when, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, and picking those right times as well. Yeah, just picking those right times and wondering even then if those right times would turn into the wrong times after I'd asked my question.
Yeah. So where was your adoptive father in all of this?
Well, he was there, but he was just really vacant. And I guess almost neglectful. He wasn't unkind. I will say that about him. He was never unkind. He didn't speak much. He just wasn't part of it. He was intelligent. He read a lot. He was always berated with having his head in a newspaper and listening to, you know, Radio 4. And I just saw them living parallel lives, really. There was no warmth even between them. They never held hands. They never kissed goodnight or good morning or anything like that. I remember leaving home once at 15 with my bags packed and walking right past him, and I said, I'll see you later. And he said, see ya, but didn't notice anything different. It was just like, oh, where are you going or anything like that. He was just there, but not there.
How do you make sense of that now as an adult looking back?
Um, I I I don't really make sense of it. Their marriage seemed to be like a marriage out of convenience. They were both older parents. I think it was a case of they needed to find a partner, and it just happened later in life for them. I don't think it was a happy marriage. I felt sorry for him a lot of the time, especially when he was older and he got very sick. I do remember my godmother who said to me, "Look, he had a choice. He didn't have to stay, but he chose to stay." And I just felt sometimes he would have been happier if he hadn't been there. It was kind of like he was living in his own little bubble in a household, and not having any say in what was happening in that household, or having any, you know, yeah. I I just wondered why he stayed and why he didn't go. It would have been a lot better for him if he had.
Yeah. Can you take us back, Tracy, to when you were told about your adoption as a child? When did you first learn and who told you?
No one really told me. I think I was about 8 years old. I can't quite remember. And it wasn't a conversation. I was given a book to read, and I was kind of left to make sense of it on my own at the time. I mean, at a young age, you don't fully understand what it means. You just understand that something important about you is different, I suppose. There was no space there to ask questions or talk it through. And I guess it was confusing and isolating. I needed to process it, but I didn't know what I was processing or what I could process it with. So I don't know even know if that makes sense. But I guess looking back, what stands out isn't just the information itself, but how it was shared with me. I mean, like being given a book rather than a conversation, that it just reinforced that it became something that I had to carry quietly and understand it in my own way. And it wasn't something that we could talk about openly. It really wasn't. So I can understand. I was later given a book as well, learning about the facts of life. I mean, that I can understand, you know, that parents do that type of thing, but not when it came to, oh, by the way, you know, we're not your real parents. You know, this is what happened.
You told me about your godparents who, during your childhood, you described them as a lifeline. Can you tell me about the role that they played in your life?
Yeah, my godparents were a lifeline. I had wonderful godparents, and I had an uncle. I called him my Uncle John. He was just amazing. They would come and visit every 6 weeks or so, or we would go and visit them. And he would just make a beeline for me, and he would pick me up and take me outside, and we would just literally have the day together. And he was the one that later on told me that he wasn't my real uncle. And I thought, what do you mean? And it was very confusing because I'd already been given the book about, you're adopted, what have you, but I still thought my uncle was my real uncle. I thought it only really related to my parents, and my uncle not being my real uncle was really devastating for me. And I thought, how can you not be my real uncle? You're such a wonderful person and what have you. I didn't ask him any of this. I just thought it at the time that he was telling me. But I think years later, I was also quite grateful that he told me that, because it was like there was no secrecy there. It was more, I care about you this much to let you know. So yeah, it was, yeah.
It was kind of your first real explanation in some ways about your adoption.
It was my first real explanation. And as well, it was obviously an important time because I remember where I was, and I remember his face. I remember him looking at me, getting down on my level and telling me. So that was very, that was very important to me, looking back on it. Yeah.
Yeah, you said to me that you experienced both comfort and loss in that moment.
I did, because I think the loss was, my gosh, I mean, does this mean I'm never going to see you again? And years later, he met my elder son, Ben, when he was a baby. And you know what? He treated him exactly the same way. He would come in, make a beeline for him, swoop him up and take him outside. And yeah, so it wasn't just something that he felt he had to do. It was something that he wanted to do.
Yeah. I'm glad that you had him in your life.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So what wasn't said to you about adoption when you were growing up, and how did that silence shape your understanding of yourself?
I guess there was no reassurance. I mean, for me, it felt like it was just some sort of practical arrangement. It wasn't talked about, and I learnt very quickly that it was something that I couldn't ask about either. There wasn't a space to be curious. I was told I had to be grateful. I think that a lot of adoptees are told that they have to be grateful. My adoptive mother used to use words such as, "You are forbidden to tell anyone you are adopted." She once said to me something quite interesting. She says, "If you ever see your mother on the other side of the street, you are to keep walking." And I thought, well, I kind of felt a bit confused about that, because I didn't even know what my biological mother looked like, so I couldn't actually understand how I would recognise her. So it was a bit like there was a rule there without any context behind it, and to me it suggested that my origins were something to be avoided.
And maybe shameful.
Yeah. And it placed a boundary around, I guess, any questions I had before any questions could be asked as well. She also told me never to trust a Welshman, and at the time it was said really casually, and she said it quite a few times. It was like an offhand rule about the world, never trust a Welshman, and I didn't question it, and because I didn't have enough information to question it, and it was only much later on I discovered that both of my parents are Welsh. So, and that comment then took a completely different weight, because I guess without realising it, I'd kind of absorbed a bit of a warning that was in some way about my own history, my own origin, and I couldn't quite connect those dots as a child.
Yeah.
But they do, you're right, they plant the idea that parts of you come from somewhere that might be untrustworthy.
Yeah.
Or undesirable, or keep them at a distance. So
that's it. We don't necessarily cognitively understand, but somewhere in our body, there's an uneasiness about things that tells us what maybe is not safe to explore, and where there might be risk or danger, or
Yeah, I guess as well, especially when it comes from someone that holds all the authority, like my adoptive mother did, and how small statements can shape you along the way, and so.
So at some point you found a letter in your adoptive parents' files that described you in very transactional terms. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, it was a letter that was sent to my adoptive parents, And I think got it here somewhere. The opening phrase was something along the lines, "We have a baby called Jane for adoption and wonder if you'd like to consider her." And I think later on in the letter it said, "If you'd care to see this baby, would you please ring me here at the baby home or on this number later on this evening." So I think "consider this baby for adoption" was the phrase that stood out for me. And I still find it strange because when you're a baby, there's nothing really to consider in a way that we normally, I guess, think about a person. There's no personality, no sense of who I might have become. It's just really about gender and appearance, I guess, and whether or not a baby fits someone's life at that moment. To me, it sounds a bit like, being weighed up, not as a human, but just as an idea. Here's an idea. And that's kind of, that's kind of what it felt like to me. Belonging to someone came as a decision. There was no connection. Love came as after approval rather than just being there. And that's how I saw it. I don't think that's the intended message, but that's how it settled with me.
Yeah, I completely understand that. My parents told me that when they were contacted, they were told to adopt me. They were told that there were 3 babies in Brisbane waiting for them to look at, and they could make their choice from the 3. And always kind of found like you get to go shopping and pick the best of the bundle.
Yeah.
I was the first they saw, but
yeah, it's a bit like going to Woolworths and choosing the odd bunch, isn't it?
yeah,
So
it didn't sound nice. Part of a funny little anecdote about, and I'm like, yeah, it's not that nice, really.
yes, it's not. Yeah.
So we're moving forward now to 1988. That's the year that I graduated high school. And you moved to Australia from the UK. What did that represent for you at that point of your life? Quite a bit, I'm thinking.
Yeah, it did. I had gone backpacking in 1988, and I met my husband that year. He'd already been living in Australia. We travelled back to the UK with each other, and then we worked a little bit in the UK, and then he said to me, "What do you think of the idea of moving to Australia?" He'd already been married before and had children from a previous marriage, so he obviously wanted to come back and carry on the relationship with his children. And I didn't have anything to lose by doing it because he'd already lived there. And we developed quite a nice relationship by then. It wasn't a move into the unknown for me. It was, for once, something that felt really steady and hopeful. It was an opportunity to distance myself from my past. A bit of a chance to build something on my own or with someone that I really loved. So, yeah. And it wasn't this time about leaving. It was about choosing this. This is something that I'm choosing to do. So so that was important to me at that point in time in my life. I think I was 24 at that point in time. And I think that was just one of the first times that I allowed myself to, I guess, trust someone and believe that home could be something that I created, not something that I was assigned to.
That choice is very important.
Yeah.
So you went on to have your first son in Australia, and you described to me feeling some pressure to go back to the UK and present him to your adoptive parents.
Yes. Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yes, I did. My adoptive parents actually came to Australia for the birth, and that period of time was very, very traumatic for me. I was already overdue. My son simply wasn't ready to come yet. I don't know if that was something psychological there or not. I don't know, but instead of feeling supported, I felt watched and questioned. I don't think my adoptive father could have cared less, to be honest, but definitely my adoptive mother. I remember going to the hospital for weekly checkups because I was overdue, and which in itself was, tiring and I guess emotional as well. And each time I came home, my adoptive mother would ask me, "Well, what's wrong with you? We're going home in a few days. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you having this baby?" That landed really heavily with me. It turned something really natural into something that felt like a personal failing as well. And so by the time I was induced, I was already carrying a lot of stress. I was about to become a mum. I didn't feel protected. I didn't feel reassured. I did with my husband, of course, but I felt scrutinised and anxious by somebody that should have been there for me to help and support me. My choices were just being judged all the time. And it reinforced those old patterns, even in pregnancy, even in about to become a mum. I felt that familiar pressure to perform correctly, not disappoint, to prove that I was doing things right. And looking back, I can see now how that deeply affected me, and what should have been a time of, complete and utter joy and became one of tension and self-doubt. And honestly, I couldn't wait for them to leave. I really couldn't wait for them to leave. And then I thought, never again. I'm never ever going to do this again. But I did do it again, Joe. I let them in again when my second son was born. And it was only when my third son came along that I said, no more. I can't do it this time. And that was a lovely release. And I felt, and you know what, as well, I didn't feel any disloyalty there either. I just couldn't go through that same pattern. I knew I had to do something. And then going back to my first son, the pressure of bringing him to the UK, it was like a choice. It was like my responsibility. So I was navigating me as a mum, and then I was managing that old family dynamic and those old expectations, and that created a lot of tension for me. I wanted to protect my son and myself, but I felt obligated. I felt loyalty there. And people have asked me, why on earth would you have done that to yourself? And I thought, if you haven't been adopted, you'll never know. And I don't mean that in any disrespect or anything to people that haven't, but they're the only family that you've known, right? So you're still wanting that approval, and I always did. So emotionally, I felt really torn. I wanted to distance myself, settle into motherhood on my own terms, but another part of me felt that I needed to comply, to do what was expected, even if it didn't feel right. And that conflict was exhausting. It really was.
Yeah. The obligation is strong, isn't it? That feeling of obligation that you owe somebody something. Yeah.
Yeah, it really was. It really was.
You did go back to the UK, so you did go.
I did.
And there was a suggestion from home from your partner who suggested that you use that time to search for your biological family.
Yeah, no, it's not often that he says things, but I think he could see the visit from them and how it had a profound effect on me all the time. And he said to me, why don't you? If you're going to go back, he said, I support you going back. He said, but if you're going to go back, he said, do something useful and find your mother. And kind of made me laugh a bit at the time. And I thought, God, but how do I do that? How do I actually do that? And of course, I often thought about it. And
this
I think
the early 90s, so very different landscape to today.
And I think becoming a mum had also shifted something to me, holding my son when he was born. I carried quietly for years those questions that, suddenly I needed to fill that gap and understand where I came from. And now I was responsible for someone else as well. So that was important to me. And I do remember when my son was born, he was only 3 days old, and I really wanted to make time stand still and really kind of, just start filling in those gaps from those early times and what it must have felt like for her. And she had to give me up because she had me for 2 weeks before, I was handed over to wherever it was I was handed over. So, it must have been incredibly painful. But also as well, I had support in the way that I hadn't before with my husband. I wasn't doing it alone. He was with me, not on the trip, but he was with me and supporting me. And it's funny actually because, we talk about betrayal a lot, but the idea of searching didn't feel like a betrayal. And it wasn't something that I felt I needed permission to do. It felt like it was self-respect. It was kind of like an act of, I guess, curiosity as well. You often go to medical appointments and say, okay, what's your medical history? I said, I have no idea. I'm adopted. I couldn't tell you. So, it was interesting to see what my feelings were at the time. I wasn't nervous about it. I don't think I was even nervous about being rejected. When I found my mother, it was just something that I needed to do. I needed to find out who I was, what my name was, where I came from. Yeah, that was so super important for me and also for my children.
Yeah. So can you tell us about that early 90s search and what that practical and emotional process was like,
Yeah.
pre-internet, pre-mobile phones?
Yeah, I have to really search the archives in my mind to try and remember that. And it was, you're right, it's so different from today. I first of all had to get my original birth certificate. That was the first thing I needed to get. I would have got it from births, deaths and marriages in the UK. I'm pretty sure it was always held in Liverpool, wasn't it? All births, deaths and marriages, and Bootle in Liverpool. And but I wasn't sent it. I I was living in Townsville at the time. I knew I had to go into the city and I was going to be handed my real birth certificate. I was also had to have counselling. Now we're not talking about counselling for an hour here, Joe. We're talking about maybe a couple of minutes. Do you realise what it might mean if you find your birth mother, and do you realise that there might have been challenging circumstances surrounding it? It might have been a violent encounter that was experienced, all that type of thing. And so I had to do that. Honestly, that didn't take long. And then I was handed this piece of paper with my name on it. And that was the very first time that I thought, wow, this is my identity. This is my real name. This is what I was given. So yeah, so that was very profound at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's strange to know that there had been another identity. I remember feeling that like a punch in the stomach, because I was probably given a little bit of counselling or a letter or something when I received my information too, and yet I didn't absorb that. So when it arrived, I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was but yeah, so I knew then I had to conduct my search, and honestly I cannot remember where I found these people. It must have been on this pamphlet that they'd given to me. But there was two names on there, or one name on there, and it was a couple, and their names were Mr. and Mrs. Peacock. That was their names. There was a phone number. It was in the UK. I called them. I gave them all the information that I had on the birth certificate, which had my mother's name on there, also where she was living at the time of my birth. I think it had her parents' names on there. They were quite unusual surnames, so it actually didn't take her long to track down my mother. Anyway, she said, leave it with me for a week, and I thought, well, that suits me, because I was travelling then to the UK with a 9-month-old baby, going off to see my adoptive parents and staying there for a bit. I didn't have mobile phone, of course. So when I got to the UK, they asked me that I rang them before I left Australia. She was ring me, and so I rang her, and she said, we've located your mother, and we obviously need to speak with her and see if she wants to speak to you. And I said, obviously, I understand. And she said, we will ring her every hour on the hour until she picks up the phone, because I just assumed they must have been working and what have you. And said to me, please give us a call every few days and we'll let you know how we're progressing. And I think it came to, I just remember it being a Friday, and I remember being out with a friend, and I said, oh, do you mind if I just borrow your phone at your house and just ring this couple who was looking for my mother? And so I rang Mrs. Peacock, and she said, yes, we've spoken with your mother and she wants to see you. So that was the first step. And she said, here's the phone number. And I thought, right, okay, well, I'm here. I've got access to a phone. I may as well do it now. So I rang her and I spoke with her, and it was surreal. It was I don't know, I just blurted things out, I can understand
for a call.
I understand if I can understand if you don't want to see me, but I just want to ask you a few questions, if that's okay. I just wanted some past history, which is, I think we all do that, I think, don't we? It's like, I just want some but we don't really. We actually do want to get to know them. So I was kind of giving her a bit of an out. She said that she'd never stopped thinking about me from the day that she placed me into care. She gave me the address to go and see her and visit her. And then I got off the phone and I thought, how am I going to navigate this? Here I am in the UK with my son, staying with my adoptive family. How am I going to do this? So I just carried it really, really quietly. And I think I must have made up some excuse of going somewhere. Hired a car, got a baby seat for my son, and travelled across country over to, she lived near Wells. I was visiting my parents down in Dorset, so it was quite a significant journey to get to see her, and got to the place. You remember stepping out of the car and there was this huge double gates, and huge brick wall, and I thought, oh my gosh, how do I get in? How do I get into this house even? And it was one of those places where you've got the huge double gates, but then you've got this little tiny door that you can open and you can step through. And it was a gravel driveway. It was a huge gravel driveway, and I started pushing my son up in his stroller, and
No.
and I was wearing these ridiculous shoes at the time, and in the end, I remember turning the stroller around, taking my shoes off, and sort of dragging him up in his stroller, because that was the only way that I could get the wheels to move. And thought, oh my God, I wonder what they must thinking, because there's all windows at the back of the house. So I'm thinking they're watching me, and they'd be thinking, my God, who is this woman?
I hope they were watching and not coming out to help.
So yeah, it was quite, looking back on that, it was quite hilarious.
Yeah.
And anyway, I composed myself, got to the front door, knocked on the door, and my mum's husband came out. Who I refer to as my stepfather now, and he opened the door, and he took both my hands, and he said, "Oh my God," it's like going back 20 years, and that was lovely. He made me feel very welcome and invited me in. I went into a room. There was photos in the room, and of course I immediately started looking at all the photos, and then my mother came downstairs, and we chatted, and I said, I need to ring my husband and let him know that I've found you. So I quickly rang my husband in Australia. Don't even remember what time it was there. I probably woke him up. And then we carried on chatting for that day. She talked to me about some trauma they'd experienced in their lives. They'd lost a son about 10 years earlier. And I'm trying to think now, it was a very emotional day. You lose a lot of energy and sort of thinking about what you're going to say next and what have you. And then my half brother came round. She had a son and a daughter with her current marriage, and he was very excited. And then a bit later on in the afternoon, I met my half sister. She was a little bit more standoffish, a bit of an observer. She left quite soon. And I thought immediately, I'd done something wrong or said something to make her leave. But my mother later on said, don't worry, it's fine. We'll go and visit her tomorrow, which we did. And then I got to actually meet her on her own.
They only just found out pretty recently, hadn't they, about you?
It's funny, actually, you should say that, because she'd never told them. And a week, I think, before she got the phone call from Mrs. Peacock, she told them that about me. And then they decided themselves that they were going to search. And of course, I cut that down very, very quickly by getting in there first. And but they were going to start their own search, because I think the laws have changed in the UK as well. I'm not quite sure. Can't quite remember whether or not they were able to, because I was of consenting age. But anyway. Yes, so I found them. Then I left that day, went home to my adopted family's house, and that was strange, because I had this massive secret then that I couldn't talk about openly with my adopted parents. Yeah. On the outside, I was just going about my visit, but internally I was holding on to something very significant on my own, and I wasn't about to cause any distress or reopen any old tensions either. So
well, you hadn't even been able to talk to your mother, to talk about what you wanted to watch on TV. So this is
exactly,
a very precarious conversation to have.
Yeah. It's funny though, Jo, because at the same time, that secrecy kind of, I don't know, gave me sort of some strange kind of protection in a way. It allowed that search to be mine. It wasn't being managed. It wasn't being judged. It wasn't being shaped by anyone or anybody's emotions, because I kept it to myself. I moved at my own pace, and I didn't have to explain anything to anyone. Yeah.
So what did you discover about the circumstances of your conception and adoption?
My mum and her current husband, they had been engaged, and the engagement was broken off. I'm not quite sure what circumstances were. They were quite young. And then
the husband, you mean the husband she was married to when you met her?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. She was working at a factory at the time, and my father was also working at that same factory. She was now, single person again. So she developed a relationship with him that was quite short-lived. And as soon as she found out that she was pregnant with me and she went to tell him, he wasn't there to tell. She went to see his mother, and his mother said that he'd left to go back into the Navy, I think it was. And so all of a sudden she was well and truly on her own. She was sent away to Exeter to live with an aunt. She stayed with that aunt. She had to work to pay her keep while she was living with that aunt, and all the time she was pregnant with me. She tried to take her life when I was about 8 or 9 months old. I don't know the whole circumstances around there. I think it's very raw and very traumatic for her to go into any detail, but she did tell me that that's what she tried to do because she felt there was no way out. She just didn't feel that. She just didn't have any support, no support whatsoever. She wasn't told what it would be like when she went into labour. She was in a place where I believe there was unwed mums and also mums that were wed. She said there was only really one person in there that was kind to her, and that was a lady that was having a baby. She was married to the pastor, and she was lovely. She said she was really lovely to me. After I was born, she kept me for 2 weeks, and I don't know why they did that. I really don't know why they did that. So she said I had to feed you and look after you for that 2 weeks, and then
It seems like a UK thing. Like I don't hear that having happened in Australia very much.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so, Joe. I'm not sure. But then she went back. I think she went back to her parents' house. And then a bit later on, she said the police arrived to tell me that you'd gone into hospital, that I'd gone into hospital. And I was unwell and underweight and had a sticky eye, as it was described. But later on, I was fine, feeding well on Carringate milk at the times. But that must have been awful for her as well, as, having to give me up and then learn that I wasn't well, and then potentially not know what had happened to me afterward. Her then ex-fiance came back on the scene, and they got back together, and then about 6 weeks later they got married, and she said that that was her way out. That was really her way out of that situation. And then they went on to have another son about 18 months later, and then their daughter about 3 or 4 years after that. Yeah, so those were the circumstances surrounding my conception. I didn't think there was anything, too romantic about it, but yeah, one can fantasize.
Did she tell her husband about you?
Yes. Yes, she did. Yes, she did. Yeah. It was 1964 though, wasn't it? There's no support, there's nothing. And then suddenly, you're having, if he was going to take me on as his own, then it was, talking to his family about that. And yeah, I think it would have just been so difficult.
Yeah.
For them as well. So it was choices and circumstances at the time, but I think the choices would have been very, very, very difficult at that point in time. There's too many things against them too, as well. Just the way things were in those days.
So how has your relationship with your mother unfolded since then? There's a lot of years gone by now.
Yeah, there's a lot of years gone by. So it was July 1994 that we met. There was, obviously, geographically, there was a big distance between us, communication-wise. It was expensive to ring England back then. It was pre-internet. It was Zoom and things like that. But what was lovely was that in the year that I met her in 1994, we were getting married. My husband and I were getting married in October. And on the day that I left, I forgot to mention that I went back to stay there for a few days before I headed back to the UK when I first met her, and got to know her a little bit better before I headed back to Australia. And it was during that time my stepfather said to me, I'd like your mother to come to Australia for your wedding. How do you feel about that? And I thought that would be amazing. So my adoptive parents weren't coming out to my wedding in any case. And so I knew that there was no, sort of collateral damage to navigate in that respect. So, but she came out and she gave me away at my wedding, and it was a wonderful moment. And so my relationship with her really just unfolded slowly across distance, across many, many years. Communication was limited, letters and the occasional phone calls. It was expensive, as I mentioned, and I think I used to hang out for the letters, and I used to check the mailbox most days just to see if there was a letter from her. And it was, it's hard work across distance. It really is. You really have to not read into things too much. You have to keep going with it. You have to keep the momentum going if you want to have a relationship. That's really important. And I'm really grateful to my stepfather, as I refer to him now, because he could have put up so many roadblocks if he'd wanted to. He really could have. One thing I do know, at my wedding, my mum felt a lot of shame and wondered what people would think of her, but everyone was just really excited and welcoming. So they just made her feel really welcome, which was lovely. So, yeah. But now I think we have a good relationship.
That's good. Something you shared with me that really resonated for me was you spoke still, even though your relationship is good, that there's a silence that still exists between you and that she's never really asked you about your childhood or adoption
No,
and what it was like for you. How do you understand that now?
I think I understand it with more compassion now than I did earlier in the piece. I don't think her silence came from lack of care though, Jo. I think it came more from fear of what she might hear from me, because I don't think any biological mother wants to know that their child has gone to a very challenging situation or challenging childhood. I think it was also fear for her of reopening pain, confronting that guilt or loss that she's probably now been carrying for decades. And as I mentioned, they had their trauma in the past as well. So I don't think it's been an easy life for her either. So, yeah. And I think for a long time there, I kind of waited for her to ask me questions. And I thought she just didn't ask because the experience was just something that she couldn't bear to know. And I think now that I see that her silence is a way of her surviving, I think just as my silence was probably once mine as well, if that makes sense. Yeah. I used to get a little bit frustrated.
There
Yeah.
is a cost for us, though, when we are holding our tongue about that part of our experience. For me, I always feel like there's a part of me you're never going to know.
Yeah.
What does it cost you?
The cost for me is not being able to speak my truth, staying guarded, I suppose, even in relationships that really matter. I think there's a quiet loneliness in that, and it's like self-containment. And I think over time that can be really exhausting. I think for me, I think I mentioned that I'm never fully my true, authentic self. And I like that, I think, with all of my extended family, because I never not want to be invited back to the table. And I think I mentioned as well that I've never really had any disagreements or arguments simply because of that. I never not want to be invited back to the table. But at the same time, I've never been able to speak without filtering as well. So that's the cost to me, I think. Yeah, it's carrying a bit of an emotional weight on your own experiences from childhood that will remain unshared. Can be exhausting.
Yeah. Now, I waited about 4 months before I was starting to feel a lot of pressure around wanting to ask my mother about who my father was. In the end, I didn't say it first, she did. But I was 4 months, you were 4 years before you asked. What made that question feel so risky?
I think what made it risky is that she'd never really spoken about him. I mean, he'd abandoned her when she needed him the most. So, and again, I thought I'd then spent 4 years, creating a relationship with my biological mother and my stepfather. I didn't really want to ruin that. And I thought, well, if I asked that question, I could ruin it. And so anyhow, I wrote her a letter and I said, would you help me find my birth father? I didn't hear back from her for months and months and months. And I thought, well, there you go. You've ruined it. You did ruin it. You've ruined it. That was how I felt. You should never have asked. And I felt angry with myself for even contemplating that. And I thought, how stupid of you. Anyway, it was about 3 months later and I finally heard from her. And she sent me a letter and she said, it's taking me this long because I didn't want to respond without giving you some answers. And so she had made some inquiries with the information that she had. And because I think if she told me what his last name was, I probably could have done the searching myself, but she didn't tell me what his last name was. And maybe she felt that it was her responsibility to do that searching. And for that, if that was, then I've got great respect for her for doing that. But the way in which she found him eventually was quite extraordinary.
Tell us about that.
So he lived in France. She messaged me. She said, I think he lives in France, and I think he lives with his sister. So, and this is his last name. And how she found that he lived in France was because she had a sister that worked in a funeral home in Wales. And one day this man walked in and he said, I'm here because I would like to organise a gravestone for my mother. And anyway, he organised that gravestone, paid by cheque, signed it, had his name on there. And she rang my mother and she said, I think I may have found that person that you're looking for. Is this him? And she said, yes, that's him.
What's the chances? I've heard some doozies, but that's a good one.
Yeah. So she said, yeah, that's him. And I thought, oh my Lord, how can somebody just come across from France, go into a funeral home in Wales, receptionist behind the desk is my mum's sister, and yeah. So there we go.
There's so much serendipity in your story, like that happening, the fact that, it was only, a week before Mr. and Mrs. Peacock reached out to your mother that she told her children and they decided to search. I mean, that's the universe opening doorways up, which I always think is the sign that you're on the right path. So
yeah. And so, all right, so I lived in Townsville still at the time, and I now had
from France.
A long way from France. So I now had this information, and so I spoke to my husband and he said, okay. He said, well, so what are you going to do then? And I said, I think I might drink some wine first and then call him. I drank quite a lot of wine. And I remember where I was at the moment. I was sat outside on the front deck of my home in Townsville, and I rang him, and he didn't answer. It was a female that answered, and at that time, of course, I thought that was his sister. And I thought, no, I can't do this. Put the phone down. I just completely chickened out. I sat there for a little bit and sort of contemplating things, and I thought, oh, come on, put your big girl pants on and do it. What have you got to lose?
I'm just getting the feeling of my own first phone calls and just how your heart is hammering in these moments when you're waiting for them to pick up. Gosh,
I know. So the next time I rang, which was probably not more than about 30 minutes later, it was a male voice. I asked him who he was, and I said, my name is Tracy Graham, and I live in Townsville. And I said, and I think at some point in time you worked with this lady and you had a relationship, and I am over that relationship. And there was a bit of a silence, and he said to me, and he said, and yes, and how is your mother now? And it was I just, that was really, it was probably a normal question, isn't it? But not in these circumstances. So yes, and how is your mother now? And I said, yes, she's quite well. And he said, look, I can't talk to you right now. And he said, I've got people to tell about this. And he said, I need to tell my wife and my daughter. And he said, I'll call you back in 2 weeks. And he said, what's your phone number and what's your address? So I gave him my phone number, I gave him my address, and I thought, okay. Came away from that, and I thought, okay, well, you were brave, you've accomplished something, but whether or not he calls you back in 2 weeks' time is another story, I suppose. But he did. He called me back, and he called me back on my birthday, and he called me back on my birthday, and a letter also arrived that same day.
Serendipity.
I still have that letter, and I still have that letter. And I rang my mother and I told her that I had found him, and she listened to me. I don't think she was particularly happy about the whole thing. And particularly when I came across the piece in the letter, because she did say to me, what parts are in the letter? And I said, well, there's a section here that says if you're ever in Wales, he'd like to take you out for dinner. And I said, but obviously that's not going to happen. So, but that was, likely because I don't know why he would say something like that. So just showed some interest, wanting to know about the past. He said at the time that he had been thinking about the past when I rang, again, serendipity. I said, what were you listening to? And he said, I was listening to Enya, Field of Dreams or something like that. Of course, I immediately went out and bought that CD at the time, just to get that connection, I suppose. Yeah. I'd get a bit of an understanding as to, who was this man, what was he like, and so on. So, yeah.
The ways in which we have to build connections. I remember when I met my father's family, so his like siblings and stuff, I did some research to find out things that his mother used to make. And when we had like a bit of a reunion kind of thing, I made something from there, and they had brought me grevilleas because it was the grandfather's favorite
Yeah.
plant, and made me a special cake, just these little things that
Yes. Yeah.
try and connect us,
Yeah.
try and find some common ground or something. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. It's trying to find that common ground, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It is trying to find that common ground. So that's how that unfolded. And then I think really what happened after that, I think that, obviously we kept in touch because I met him eventually as well. He'd actually, so when he rang back, I actually then got to speak with my stepmother, as I refer to her now. I have in actual fact, I have two stepmothers, and she was lovely. She was very accepting. And again, another person that could have put up some roadblocks but never did, and just completely welcoming. And then I spoke with my sister, and she was lovely, and I've met her. And I spoke with my brother as well, all on my father's side at that time, 1998. So, and again, distance was there between us, so it was really hard to keep that early on connection as well.
So over the years, there have been some more siblings that have emerged. Some through coincidence and some through DNA testing.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so around about 2010, I spent some time in the UK. I went over there for work purposes, and during that time I got to know my sister very, very well on my father's side. Stayed with her and her family, and it was really lovely getting to know her. And then I got to know her mum a lot better, and I got to know my dad a lot better as well during that time. His health was quite poor as well. He'd suffered a stroke, and he'd had some heart surgery, and when they were living in France he contracted Lyme's disease, so he wasn't in good shape. So it was good to be able to spend that time with him. So I was there for about 12 weeks, and then I returned to Australia. And during that time, of course, I spent some time going to visit my mum as well, and my stepfather. But I think reluctantly now I'd also kept from my mother that I was also, getting to know my real father at the same time. I didn't feel happy about that, but I felt it best at the time not to talk about it. My mum had always asked me not to speak about him in front of my stepfather. Not that I ever would. I would never ever have done that ever. But she did ask me. Not to make that mention, so I never brought it up. And so I was kind of leading a bit of a double life whilst I was in the UK for 12 weeks or so, which I don't know, sounds awful, but that's just the way it is.
It sounds not abnormal for adopted people navigating reunion, to be honest.
Yeah, well, again, you don't want to open up any wounds. You want to be invited back to the table. You don't want to be told, I don't want to see you again, because if you carry on that relationship, that's the end of ours, that type of thing. So I was quite scared in that respect. And then anyway, I came back to the UK. It was around about October, and I think it was January or February the following year in 2011 that my sister rang me, and she said, "Are you sitting down right now?" And I said, "As a matter of fact, I am." And she said, "We found another sister." And I said, "No way." Anyway, she said, "Do you want her details?" And I said, "Oh God, absolutely. Yeah." She said, I've met her, I've told her about you and what have you. And she said, and also, I need to let you know that she has the same name as you. And I thought, right, just spelt differently. So a bit later on, I rang my sister, and she was lovely. She really was. And a little bit, I don't want to barge into anything that, there's already, a relationship going. And I thought, wow, you're kind of reacting the same way as I am, but you are not adopted and what have you. So I thought, which was lovely. It was a lovely, lovely quality. And her mum had a similar experience as my mum, in fact, that she'd met our father and had a relationship, and he then disappeared as well. And I think she had quite a good network, and she managed to keep my sister. I dare say it would have been very, very challenging, but she had quite a good network and some close friends, which was lovely. And it wasn't soon after that we were all at our father's funeral, because he passed away. And I always felt immense guilt that I'd managed to have that 12 weeks. Well, actually, it wasn't just 12 weeks, it was 13 years that I'd got to know him over time, but I'd had 12 weeks sort of getting to know him better and also visiting his home in France and spending some quality time with him. And I felt really sad for my sister that she hadn't had that time to get to know him. And I think by then he'd got tired of constantly being found out and having these children to other ladies. Yeah, so I think his time had come where he'd run out of places to hide, really. Yeah, so I think he knew a lot of us in the past because he mentioned once, or my sister, Tracy, mentioned to me that I got talking to her mum, made contact with her again after Tracy had been born, and he knew that she was called Tracy. So when I rang him that day, I often think back now, I wonder if you thought that you had got a different Tracy, or I was talking or describing a different mum.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we'll never know.
No.
Yeah.
And then there was a DNA test that happened.
Well, yes, we decided on doing a DNA. I think not because we didn't think that we weren't related. I think we knew that we were. There was too much history and what have you to not know. But we did one anyway, and I think we all wanted to know how the DNA was mapped out over time, and also I'd always wanted to know my heritage and how many parts of this was I and what percentage of this was I. And so we did all of that. And of course, both my sisters and I came up with very high matches. And I logged onto an old Gmail address. It was a Gmail address. Oh, that's what I was getting onto Ancestry. And I couldn't remember which email address I'd used. And I thought, I just want to go in and have a quick look and see how the DNA, because even though you weren't part of finding a family tree, the DNA side meant that you could still log in and look at how your DNA was unfolding. And I noticed that there was a message in there from this lady. And so I read it and I thought, the match is really high. And her letter to me was basically, I'm doing my family tree, I've done my DNA, I've come to a bit of a sort of a roadblock in that you must be related to me in some way, but it must be through your mother's brother or sister or something like that. And I thought, no, that doesn't work. Doesn't make sense. And then I thought weird things. I thought, oh, maybe my mother had another child, or even something like that went through my mind. And I thought, no, that doesn't work either. So I got onto my sisters on our WhatsApp and I said, can you hop into the DNA site on Ancestry and have a look at this person here that's shown up? Anyway, then we all got sort of chatting and I thought it can only mean one thing, that she's a sister, and she was the eldest as well. She was older than me. Yeah, she was older than me. So it was, I think after a while, my elder sister then said, she went to work one day and she had a really close friend at work, and she said, can you help me unravel this? She said, there's these two people that have got the three people that have got a really close DNA match with me. And she said, but it just doesn't make sense to me. This friend of hers said, yeah, they've got to be your sisters. How can they not be your sisters? So anyway, my elder sister said she went home and she just cried and cried and cried. And she thought she was home on her own, but her daughter and her husband was there, and they heard her and came racing up the stairs to say, my God, what's happened? What's happened? And then in the end, she just blurted it all out. And so, yeah, so now we've gone from 3 sisters on my father's side to 4.
Both of your adoptive parents have now passed away.
Um,
There was a lot of emotional labour that you were expected to carry out right to the end.
um,
How did you
yeah.
decide where your responsibility ended?
When they died, my responsibility ended for anything emotional that was going on my adoptive family. My adoptive father, I mentioned earlier, became quite ill. He had prostate cancer, which eventually metastasized to his brain. And I went to visit one year, and I felt deeply sorry for him, deeply, deeply sorry for him. So I organised for him to go into palliative care, and I had to do that from Australia. And luckily I found really supportive hospice in their hometown, and I managed to get him into that palliative care. When I went to see him, he wasn't communicating anymore. He really was, at the end of life. And my doctor came with me that first day, and she said, right, okay, it says I'm off home now. And I said, you can't go home. He's at end of life. You can't go home. You can't leave him here on his own overnight. And she said, no, I'm off home. And I said, well, I'll stay here then. And she said, okay, well, if anything happens during the night, she said, I don't want to know. I don't want you calling me or anything like that. Just leave it till the morning. And he did pass that night. And I then came back to Australia. I think that was in 2005. And then there was more pressure, I think, to come back at another stage because she was getting frail, and we had to get her into a nursing home because she was getting early onset dementia. And so we did manage to do that, and that was closer to where my brother and his wife, my adopted brother and his wife, lived at the time. But again, it was all that responsibility of trying to find care homes, trying to navigate through caring for her whilst I was in Australia. When she passed away, that was it for me. I cut ties with the entire adoptive family, and walked away. And I've never made any attempts to reconnect, and nor do I want to. And that decision has given me peace. Doesn't stop the past, but it's given me peace. And it was like a massive burden was released at the time. And I later on, when I was sorting out her belongings, I came across, and this was when I finally started to understand her and her volatility and the way she was over time, was I found this letter in a filing cabinet where she had given birth in the early, 1940s to a son and given up for adoption. And I thought, wow, she was carrying all that grief and that shame. And I felt quite angry as well because she'd passed that on to me.
Yeah.
She'd passed that grief and that shame on to me. I was carrying it for her. And, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite the discovery, isn't it?
Yeah, it was quite the discovery. I understood right then, about because I was never allowed in her bedroom. Don't go in my bedroom, whatever you do, it's private, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, I don't want to go in there. But, yeah, you're making me think there's something in there that you don't want me to see. But yeah, it wasn't until, it was. And it wasn't until years later. And, yeah. So, and that was that.
Yeah. So when I asked you why you wanted to speak about your story now, you said it's for your sons. What is it that you want them to understand about your life and your choices?
I don't think they really know about my life. I don't think they really know about my life. I think I found it quite hard to show too much emotion as I was growing up, as they were growing up. A fear of that rejection as well. I have no idea why, but gosh, it runs deep, doesn't it? And I don't think they really know my past, and it's their past as well. So I want them to know about that past. It might help them to reflect on, why sometimes I am a bit reserved, and I just want them to understand what my life looked like and how I wanted their life to be a lot different than that. I didn't want their life to be like mine. I wanted to have that kind, loving relationship, which I do have with my sons. It's, there's no doubt about that. But I want them to see probably sometimes the reasons why I don't show my true, authentic self. Because I do remember one of my sons saying to me once, you're not silly like Dad, or, you don't hug us as tight as you should hug us. And I thought I did, but maybe there's part of me that didn't. And it's not just for them, it's for grandchildren as well, I suppose. Yeah, I think most of all I'm doing it for me though, Jo. This has been a big step for me to do this. Enormous, I have to say. I think I mentioned to you earlier this morning, I felt so nervous.
Yeah. I hope less nervous now.
Yeah, less nervous now. But yeah, this was a huge step for me. And I also want other people to hear this story and think there's hope on the other side. And if you're ever thinking about reaching out and finding out, do it. But do it in your own time and do it at your own pace. And don't be driven by other people's emotions as well. Yeah, definitely Mostly I want to leave a bit of a legacy for my sons. They might not listen to it until they're 65, but that's okay. You know, that's completely okay. And but also I want other people in the meantime to get some comfort and knowing that they're not alone.
Well, I am absolutely sure, Tracy, that your story is going to resonate for a lot of listeners, and I hope for you that it's helped you just make sense of and articulate your own story. You know, I've found over the years starting to express more of my story has been very healing and helped me stake my claim in it a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
And I hope that you get that out of this experience and a whole lot more too. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for making it so easy for me.
I'm glad. I've just so enjoyed getting to know you and hearing your story. It's a real privilege for me to hear it.
Thank you so much.
And for anyone tuning in, remember that every adoption experience is unique and it's never too late to begin your own journey of exploration. And if you're looking for some more resources or support or simply a space to share, Jigsaw Queensland's here to help. If you'd like to support the podcast, then subscribe, review and share episodes. It all helps. And you can always shoot us an email too, because we really love to hear from you and what you think of the episodes. And you might even want to share your own story with us. And if you want to do that, on the podcast page of the Jigsaw Queensland website, you'll find a prospective guest form there. Just need to fill that in and shoot it through to us. And just remember that Jigsaw Adopt Perspective is listened to by people all over the world. I'm Jo Sparrow. I'm the president of Jigsaw Queensland. Bye for now.